Yeti, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeren, the abominable snowman. What is this mythical creature? Is it a figment of imagination, perhaps a forest spirit or native legend, or a flesh and blood animal? Some say it is our cousin, a robust, hairy forest man long diverged from the evolutionary tree. Others, something more unusual that we are only beginning to understand. We know so little about this phenomenon, which accounts of the creature number in the thousands. But the heard or seen, but only in glimpses, brief encounters that leave an indelible impression upon the viewer. Hunters, hikers, backpackers, people simply walking in the deep forest and not so deep would have tales to tell and often do so anonymously, famed or unknown. Each tell a similar story of an often inexplicable and unexpected meeting, often in the dark, but at times even in broad daylight. What can we learn from such crossings? What little do we know about such beings imagined or real? Do they exist, and if so, what are they? Tonight, we will explore the world of the Sasquatch, or what is known about this elusive creature. Listen to Christian and Rex discuss the particulars of some highly unusual evening encounters in the wilds of the Uintas Mountains of Utah, located in the United States of America. High Strangeness in the high Uintas.
Welcome everyone. Tonight we have Christian with us. He's a professional photographer with a college degree. He's a wilderness backpacker of 20 years and a former Bigfoot skeptic. Based on my interaction with him, I've found him to be credible, forthright, genuine. We might say we're going to try to discuss some high strangeness in the high Uintas Mountains tonight, or at least we're going to try to assess what is difficult to explain. We know sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. How we want to frame this discussion is to touch on some history of the area, and then we'll cover a timeline that delves into Christian's own first-hand experiences with the area. Every year that Christian has gone out, there have been, the past 11 years, some strange things happening. But not only to him, he's had witnesses on every trip except for one. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get into it here. Well, Christian, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great.
Well, thanks for being willing to share your experiences with everyone here and discuss some history of the area. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and begin with a couple things to frame, outside of your own experience. Did you want to start off with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that I visited every single year since 2009, and every single year that I go in there, I have some sort of experience that either leaves me come out scratching my head, it was downright frightening, or it's just so absolutely bizarre you just can't wrap your head around it. So, and, when you do a little research of the actual area and you see the history of it, and very high profile missing persons case from 2004 that was in this area as well, with the history, the missing persons case, then my experiences, and then stories that I've heard from other backpackers and people that have visited this area. It definitely leaves me scratching my head, wondering what's going on in here.
Right, yeah, exactly. There's I think in the 70s there have been, reports of Sasquatch from scouts, I believe, and yeah, just like you mentioned, the missing persons case. I actually, as I confided to you, knew the father of the boy that was not found. But anyway, anything else you want to add on the history of the area?
I could kind of give you just a little background on how I actually found this area.
Okay.
We were backpacking. I'm an avid backpacker and photographer and fly fisherman, and we're always hunting out those honey holes with the big fish that hide in the Uintas. And if you backpack the Uintas regularly, you can find these spots where you'll never see another human being for like 3 or 4 days, and you'll be pulling out fish the size of your forearm. So this was one of those areas we had seen on a map and we hadn't explored before, and it was Labor Day that year in 2009, and we just saw a whole bunch of different lakes in here and ponds, and we're going, one of those has got to have a big fish. So that was our whole entire, we weren't going into this basin looking for Bigfoot. That was the farthest thing from my mind. I think a couple of us Googling it the first time we had gone in there had ran into the history of this area, and we all kind of maybe chuckled about it on the hike in or whatever. That was the farthest thing from our mind, was that we weren't going in here for Bigfoot. We were going in here trying to find fish and a new place to camp, and that's kind of what our summer that year was about, was finding these just backcountry honey holes where, you throw on a fly and the second it lays on the water, you've got a big fish on,
Yeah, just to be clear, Christian's not a Bigfoot fanatic researcher, self-described in any way. Like he said, he's a outdoorsman, backpacker specifically. So he, in fact, was a skeptic. He said he'd laugh at people that have these type of stories until he had his firsthand experiences, which have added up over the years, and it's pretty difficult to deny.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't necessarily, consider myself like mocking or making fun of anybody that would believe in this stuff. I just personally, before all of this stuff happened, I just kind of, I had seen grizzly bear. I'd, been to Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, the North Cascades, all over the Wyoming wilderness. I'd seen grizzly bears in the wild. I've seen just about every wild animal in North America that you can run into. And so when you spend that much time out there and, you're not seeing this animal everybody's talking about, it's, the old adage, seeing is believing, right? And until you start having experiences and things and encounters like I have had in this area, that's what changed my mind. Before all of these experiences, I probably was the guy that was like, oh, there's no Bigfoot, and, and you hear that a lot from people because they don't believe it because they haven't seen it or they haven't experienced it. And so they have no way of comprehending what these other people have witnessed or experienced. So I'm definitely now more in the camp of I believe something's going on and it needs further investigation.
Right, I guess I should say it more in the way you wouldn't take something like that seriously until you've had these experiences which changed your mind and made you take notice.
Yeah, and and I'm definitely like firmly planted in science, so I want science to figure this mystery out. We definitely don't want to rely on a non-scientific approach to this because we're never going to get to the bottom of it. And so I'm definitely heavily weighted on the science part of it. There's individuals like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum and his books that he's written were definitely instrumental. Grover Krantz is another person that when I started researching all this stuff, I ran into his literature, and I'd say Grover's books probably tipped the scales of me, like trying to figure out what I was dealing with, just because of reading his literature and his synopsis on track evidence and the way that he was looking at things. And poor Grover, too, who was strong academics and just completely ridiculed by his peers for just holding a belief that these tracks held more weight than they were for hoaxes for him. He just couldn't buy the fact they were hoaxing. Now you look at today, like, a guy like David Attenborough, who's done a gazillion Planet Earth and that series and, all those BBC nature programs. And that's a guy that's multiple times over the last couple of years they keep asking, what's the next unknown, David? And David goes, we need to start looking into this Sasquatch Yeti thing. He's like, these tracks I'm seeing this track evidence and it's hard to refute it. So, and you have a scientist like Jane Goodall that definitely have a shared belief that this is going on. So when you start going through the scientific community and these people that are actual scientists, they're not just, Tom, Dick, and Harry that go into the woods, light a campfire on Friday night, bang some logs against trees and make noises. When you actually look at the scientific community studying this, it definitely leads a lot more weight to this subject when you're approaching things from a scientific perspective like I am. So, yeah, you start seeing the scientists do it, and then you look at all the evidence you're running into, and then the history, and it starts to weigh a little more than, it did when you're just having these things happen. And I think that's good. And I hope science is the thing that we get to the bottom of this with, because I think that's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of the truth.
Yeah, I wish Attenborough would narrate a documentary and have Jane Goodall there before they pass on. But anyway, I'm just dreaming there, I guess.
No, that would be all. I'd watch it. I love that guy. He's amazing.
Yeah, I wish he would narrate a Sasquatch.
Yeah, you can Google him. Just Google David Attenborough on Bigfoot or Yeti. You put either of those terms in, and you'll get like a half dozen interviews that he's done with TV personalities and like press for like some of his movie releases, where he says that's the next frontier. We need to look into this mystery. When you have someone as scientifically credible as David Attenborough saying, "Hey, we need to look into this," I'd say the scientific community needs to start looking into it.
I'll have to look and search the internet for that. I've not put those search terms together, but even just his voice, narrating anything seems to make it fascinating somehow. But anyway, anything else you wanted to add before we go into your timeline here?
No, I just think that kind of gives a basis of the area itself. As there was a pretty predominant sighting in the 1970s. Everybody that witnessed the sighting was affidavit by the local sheriff's department, and then it actually prompted a DWR investigation in there, and they didn't really find anything, but they did find a bunch of rabbits that were skinned but uneaten that was like the one conclusion that the DWR for the state of Utah had from their investigation of this place in the 1970s. I found that to be kind of interesting. Like, why would you put that in your notes? And I find that bizarre because most predators aren't going to skin a rabbit and not eat it. So that definitely lends to be a little bizarre.
Yep, more strangeness.
Oh yeah,
Because
this
of the
whole
area.
place. You'll see as I go through this timeline. And imagine being a backpacker as I go through these stories and tell you about each year. Imagine being a backpacker and going back year after year and having this weirdness reoccur every time you're in there. Some of it downright frightening. I think most people might not go back to that place. I guess I'm just kind of either maybe a dumb fool or a glutton for punishment, or I just can't get over whatever's in the back of my mind about this. I just have to keep going back in there because I want to know what this is.
And I guess I'll add with that, you've shared with me that it was a slow progression. Each year you'd have something strange, so it became something that's expected. Something strange is going to happen. You told me last time it's just 24 hours in there and something strange happened. And so now you have enough accumulated evidence, so you're pretty sure we're looking at Sasquatch. You probably have said that eventually anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't really see Jeffrey Meldrum, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, who's a professor of anthropology at Idaho State University. Yeah, he has this saying that, when you've ruled out all the rational possibilities, what are you left with? And that's kind of how I look at all of this is just, well, what could it be? And when you look at some of the stuff that occurred, science just can't explain it. So it's that then you're left with the unknown, which Carl Sagan said it best, absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence. And I kind of lean on that. You got to prove it doesn't exist as much as you have to prove it does exist. I think both sides of that coin have to be visited by the scientific method, or you're not really searching for the truth. You're just searching for your own bias if you're not following that process through the scientific method. For this, that's how I've tried to keep this, is very much the scientific method. I mean, I've heard all sorts of range of stories that people believe that Sasquatch is an alien or a paranormal being or, transdimensional being, or I don't think that this thing, I could be wrong. We can find out later down the road it is one of those things, right? But I think from a biological perspective and my experiences in the wilderness, this is definitely a terrestrial creature we're dealing with. And there needs to be more investigation, I think, for safety reasons, for understanding science. If this is a primate, then, we're obviously missing a large piece of the evolution chain that we're teaching in all of our education institutions. And, that chain keeps changing because of all the relic hominids they keep discovering. Like every year, it seems like they find another relic hominid in the human evolution chain. If we're missing out on that, then we're missing out on a big piece of science here. So I think that's where I kind of look at it, is I think this needs a deeper dive than what science is giving it right now. And Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum was on a podcast about a month ago that I listened to, a very interesting one. They had put him up debate against someone that was like a complete skeptic, like didn't believe this creature existed. And he was explaining on that podcast about how most DNA laboratories will only do a comparative DNA test. They will not actually biomap the genetics in the DNA material. So, all they do is look and see if that DNA matches anything known, and then if it doesn't match anything known, that's where they leave it. No lab will take it beyond that and do its, a deep genetic testing on it to see if it's a new undiscovered species, because it has such a stigma with science. They just won't touch it. I found that to be very interesting when Meldrum was talking about that.
Yeah, we could go off on the Melba Ketchum thing and how
all
the labs all of a sudden said don't put our name on the work. Once they found out that the Sasquatch was involved in the equation, and all of a sudden we don't want anything to do with it. And, well, I guess we could go ahead and start with. Did you start in 2009? I believe.
I'll go ahead and. So me and three friends who are pretty predominant outdoor folks in the outdoor industry here in Utah. What we had decided to, it was Labor Day weekend. We were kind of looking for a place to get away from the crowds because, if you go to Crystal Lake Trailhead or any of the popular areas on a holiday weekend, they just get slammed. And so, we really weren't familiar with this area and we wanted to go in there. And so we got to the trailhead and made the march in, climbed over the pass and got down to camp. And, just gorgeous area. We found this amazing campsite. One of the best in the entire Uintas. And got set up and did a little fishing, and we all had pretty good success fishing, and had a little bit of a thunderstorm, so we all took a nap and got up for dinner, crashed out, got up the next day, and we decided we were going to loop the basin off trail. There was this viewpoint we wanted to get up on so we could overlook the whole drainage up there, and wanted to visit some of these backcountry ponds to see if they're holding fish, because that's kind of what we do when we go explore new areas, see what its fishing opportunities are. And we got up to this one pond that was up from the lake that we were staying at. We were looking at have lily pads on the lake. My buddy Rob had gone over into the trees just south of I mean, literally like 20 yards from the side of the lake. There's a little tree stand, and he's up there. He's like, "Hey guys, come check this out." And we're like, "Oh, okay, what?" And we walk over there, and there's literally, like, if you could surgically precisionally cut a deer leg off of the back end of a deer's body and just leave it laying in the meadow, it was there. There's no blood, but it was as fresh as could possibly be. I mean, it had to be within an hour or two old of being on that actual animal. There was no rigor mortis in it. The joint would still bend when Robbie was picking it up. All four of us kind of got this heebie-jeebie feeling like we were being watched. And so we were like, "Oh, let's head up to the next pond. There's no fish in it." We found out it was a salamander pond. And on our way out of there, we're passing kind of the north end of it, the pond. There was like this gigantic gray hairball, literally the size of a bush in your yard. My friends were poking it with their trekking poles, and it was kind of like almost mushy, sounded wet. It was just really gross, and we just kind of were like, "Wow, whatever made that, let's get the hell out of here." And that was the 2009 trip. We really didn't have anything else happen on that one, but it was just definitely weird. And, you think about predators in the Uintas, what's going to leave a deer leg with all of its meat left on it? Well, certainly a bobcat won't, a cougar won't, a bear won't, a wolverine won't, any sort of weasel won't. They're to strip that to the bone. Coyotes, same thing. So what leaves an intact deer leg that looks like it's been surgically removed from the animal with no blood on it? And this is also Labor Day, so if you're familiar with Utah's deer hunt doesn't happen until October. So it's not like it was a hunter up there harvested a deer and then left the leg behind. It was definitely not that time of year for the deer hunt, and it was just weird. I've never seen anything like it. I've been all over the wilderness of North America, and when you see an animal limb or whatever, you'll see tendons, you'll see blood. If it was an attack area, you'll see. I know we saw a moose torn up by a grizzly bear in Alaska when we were hiking through, and the bear wasn't there anymore, but you could see the damage the bear had done to the animal, ripping its limbs off and stuff, and you cut a leg off of a deer, it's usually going to bleed, right? And there's no blood. None in the grass around it, nothing. Like, it was just bizarre. So that was the 2009 trip. And we had such a good weekend there, and we had done some good cutthroat fishing, and we were on our way out. "Oh, let's come back next year." And we can segue into the next year.
Okay. And just one comment on my end, and I have at least a couple friends that I have seen deer legs kind of just draped in trees, and so that's kind of reminds me of that, some commonality there.
So at 2010, that same group of folks that came in the year prior were going to come in, but they weren't going to get off till 6 p.m., so they weren't going to hit the trailhead till after dark, so they were going to headlamp in, and, this is Labor Day weekend, so it starts getting dark at 7:38 at night. So I went in with a guy that, I'm not going to mention his name because we don't talk anymore, and I don't want him to be dragged into anything he doesn't want to be a part of or whatever. But he wrote a pretty descriptive trip report. He's the owner of one of the most popular outdoor message boards on the internet, and he wrote a pretty descriptive report, which I can read it verbatim in here in a minute if you'd like. But it was me and him that went in early so we could secure that camp again. And we went in with him and he has a Russian bear dog. He had a Russian bear dog that it passed away, but it was me, him, and his dog that had gone in early that day on a Friday. And then, we were expecting our friends and their dogs to come in after dark. And so they were headlamping in, and we sometimes do that because sometimes you get off work late and you still want to go for the weekend, so you just jam to the trailhead, and it's kind of nice. The trails are empty, and, you use your headlamp to get into your place. So we had gone in there. We had done some fishing. We had caught some fish. It was getting to be dark. It was that, like, kind of where the light starts falling off. Like, the sun is set, the light's falling off, so the forest floor starts to get dark. See, it's light enough to still sort of see silhouettes of trees, and we had our fire going in camp, and both of us needed water. We had realized when we come back from our fishing, oh, crap, we need water. Let's go to the inlet. And the inlet's, like, literally about 25 yards from our campsite. And so we're over filling up our water, and Then we fill up the water and we start getting close, and I hit my headlamps. I'm just having kind of a little bit of trouble seeing the forest floor where I'm putting my feet. And the person I'm with does the same thing. And when he lights his up, all of a sudden we see these two gigantic eyes that if it was on the head of a creature, I mean, it would be like so far apart from where a human's eyes were. And this wasn't like, I've seen eye shine from deer and elk and other animals in the woods and moose. These were much bigger eyeballs than you would see from eye shine from some sort of deer family animal. And the interesting thing about these eyes was, and this is probably one of the three spookiest stories of this entire experience is that you could see everything behind these eyes. So if there was an animal there, you should have been able to see like a silhouette or an outline of the animal attached to these eyes, but you couldn't. And they're probably 6 to 8 feet off the ground, and you could see the trees and the ground and the silhouette and the pines, everything behind these set of eyes. And what was interesting is that the person I was with, dog, is usually will chase moose, will chase mountain goats. Like, it's a pretty aggressive dog. This dog's standing behind its owner, shaking and whining. And so it was apparently scared of whatever these eyes were, right? So we walk into camp, and all of a sudden the guy I'm with goes, "Hey, look, they're up there in the trees." And I was just like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? I kind of just had this like fight or flight thing come out, which probably, hindsight looking back, it was really stupid to do. But I'm just like, oh, I'm not scared of it. And so I started following them into the woods. And, I had a pretty big buck knife with me at that point because I used it to clean fish and fillet fish and stuff like that, and it, razor sharp. So I had drawn my buck knife, and I'm like following these eyes, and they're doing this peeking thing, which you'll hear about a lot when people, describe Sasquatch experiences. They saw this dark head peeking out from behind a tree or whatever, and you couldn't see, still no shape of the animal or body, just these eyes would peek out from behind the trees 25 to 50 yards in front of you. And after walking almost probably 100 yards into the woods, I had the guy I was with go, "Hey, Christian, get back here." And I was like, okay. And I got back to him. He's like, "Look, there's two of them." And so when we're looking up the shot into the woods where I had just walked back from, there's two sets of eyes looking at us. And the first set was probably 6 to 8 feet off the ground, and the other set was 4 to 5 feet off the ground. Both of us kind of just huddled up by the fire. And I'll tell you that my friend's dog would not leave his side, no matter if he got up to take a leak or whatever. This dog had to be like right there with him the whole time. And I've never seen this dog runs away half the time, and he has to go find it because it just goes exploring on its own. It wouldn't leave his side. It was freaky. And he had posted most of that exact same story on his message board about that trip he had gone on that weekend. And what he didn't bother to include is that we had both caught brook trout and used a fish stringer. And if you're familiar with how a fish stringer works when you want to save your fish, we were both just kind of traumatized after that and decided we won't eat them for dinner. We'll just have them for breakfast. So we just left them on the stringer in the lake. And when I got up in the morning to go down to the lake, the stringer was in the shore. Like someone had taken the stringer out, released the fish, and then put the stringer back in the shore. And talking to everybody in camp, including the person that I was with when we caught him, nobody had touched that stringer. So somebody with opposable thumbs or something with opposable thumbs had to have removed those fish from the stringer. Because if it was a coyote, bear, cougar, whatever, they would have taken fish stringer and all. So that to this day still boggles my mind. Like, where'd the fish go? And why is my stringer still on the shore? So, and they didn't get off because that stringer would have still been through the loop into the shore. It's like someone took the fish off and then pulled the stringer out the loop and put it back in the shore. So that was 2010. The rest of the weekend was pretty mellow in there. My friends finally came in. So we went from 2 people, 1 dog to 5 people, 6 dogs when they all came in, and we all kind of explained the story to them, and all of them were kind of like, huh. And one of them did make a comment that when they were coming up over the pass, they had smelled a really awful smell. Don't know if that has anything to do with our experience or if that was separate and unrelated. It was just kind of another detail that they had thrown out when they got into camp.
On that story at the beginning when you were kind of following it, is that the one where you described there might have been possibly leading you in?
Yeah. that's why my partner I was with was yelling at me to get back there because he felt like it was drawing us into the woods. It felt like that it would get just within reach where we felt like we were getting close enough to it, and then it would put enough space between us again to where you'd have to pursue it farther into the woods. And then it's I didn't see the second pair of eyes when I was following the first pair. I was so fixated on those that I didn't see the one that was like flanking me to the side. That's when my partner yelled at me and said, "Hey, get back here." And so then I made the hoof back to camp, and he was just like, "Did you see that second pair of eyes?" I'm like, "What second pair of eyes?" And then when he pointed it out, he's pointing up the hill of his headlamp, I saw him. And so it was almost like whatever was this 4 to 5 foot pair of eyes was flanking me from my left side. I probably would have kept following that pair, and who knows what would have happened. So it was definitely spooky, but still, the fact of whatever this creature was so unafraid of us. It was not skittish. It was totally toying with us. Yeah, to this day, that was one of the most frightening experiences I've had backpacking, because I definitely came back to camp and was not happy at the moment. When the rest of the crew showed up, we had such a large group in camp with that many dogs, breathed a sigh of relief. But until that point, if I had been solo and that had happened, oh man. And I go solo a lot. You have to realize about 70 to 80% of the time I solo backpack. I don't go with anybody else. And if I had been solo for this incident, man, I probably would have had a heart attack. It was freaky.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I guess 2011.
Yeah, so we had a short backpacking season this year because the 10-11 season, if you remember, was the record-breaking snowpack for the Wasatch. So we actually didn't get into the range till like mid to late July that year. So this trip didn't have a lot of activity on it, but it did have something that happened both nights that we were in there. Something kept picking up my titanium cook gear. There's this big kitchen rock in camp that's like 20 feet long and waist high. So it's like having a kitchen counter. So it's really nice. It's flat. So it's, you cook on it, put your stove on it. It doesn't tip. And it's just a nice area. You're trying to prep a meal. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better setup in the backcountry. And something was picking up my titanium gear and then setting it down on the rock. And I kept hearing in the middle of the night, and I would shine my headlamp out the door of my tent, and there's nothing there, and the titanium gear is still standing up. Well, if it's a bird or a squirrel or something like that, it's just going to knock your stuff over. It's just trying to see what it is. But whatever it was that was picking this up and setting it down was picking up and setting it down in the same position that I had left it. And I got up in the morning, and, I was discussing this with my friend that was with me, and he heard it too, and he even admitted he had heard it too, but then he was like trying to play it up like, oh, man, you got to stop this stuff about, this weird stuff in here and whatnot. He was just kind of giving me a hard time about stuff that he had heard himself. And I kind of, at that point, this is where the skepticism started melting off a little bit for me. It was just like, okay, this is the third year in a row that something weird is happening here. And other than that, we just had a great trip. Fishing was awesome. But yeah, the titanium makes a specific sound when it hits granite. It just has this like clunk sound to it. And for sure something was picking up because he heard it too. So there's two people hearing the same thing. I don't think you can make that up.
Yeah, I have a titanium water bottle, and I can confirm it has kind of a, for lack of a better description, kind of a cowbell. It's less of a ringing than maybe stainless steel or something like that. At least mine is.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. It has that kind of dull thud. It's not like a stainless steel. If you hit it, it's going to make this like ping sound. Yeah, no, titanium has this really like lackluster sound when it contacts anything and makes a noise.
Yep. Well, let's see, I guess 2012.
Yeah, this one was the second scary incident in there. So I had gone in with a friend of mine named Jeremy, his girlfriend Fleur at the time, then another friend of mine named Jason that I actually went through photography school with. And we all, four of us, had backpacked in with thunderstorms chasing us in over the pass. We'd gotten to camp. We kind of had to sit outside the tents and hunker down in an even stand of trees. We had big lightning storm come through. Then finally we just like, forget this. It's just raining and raining. And we crawled in the tents and probably took like a 3-hour nap, all of us, and then got up. Evening time was nice. We had a nice dinner, nice fire. Storm cleared out. I got to set out my camera for a little astrophotography, and then I had gone to bed. This is our first night in there, and the clouds had cleared, and this is like a full moon weekend. And so on this trip, this is a long time ago because I've sold it, but on this trip I had a Big Agnes Seed House 1 tent, and if you Google that tent, you'll see the setup and how you sleep in it. And all of us had 3 tents. Flora and Jeremy had he had like a Black Diamond trekking pole shelter with no floor, and then Jason had the Marmot Limelight, and then I had the Big Agnes Seed House. We kind of set them up in a triangle. Flora and Jeremy also have a German Shepherd with them, okay? Just let's take note of that because I'll come back to that in a minute. I had gone to bed about midnight. All of us crawled into bed about the same time. About 3:30 in the morning, I awoke to the most horrid smell I had ever smelled in my life. And I have smelled some dead carrion, dead animals in the woods. This was, if you could cross rotting meat with BO, it was just awful. And so I don't know why, I just rolled over because it was bright where the moon was shining in through the side of my tent, and I could see the silhouette of somebody or something on 2 feet with really long arms. And I was kind of like, it just kind of froze me because I think at that point when I had seen the silhouette, I finally was conscious because I was still kind of coming out of sleep when I rolled over. I literally was like wide awake at that point because I remember being like, oh, who or what is that? And it kind of was weird. You could kind of see its head bobbing side to side if you were to do like go right to left with your head bobbing. And then it reached down and tried to lift up the side of my rainfly. And that really freaked me out. And I instantly grabbed the knife that was in my tent. And then I made this like clearing my throat sound like, you know, how you clear your throat. And whatever it was, you could hear the 2 feet just patter off through the trees. And I was just like, whoa, that was really weird. And I just kind of rolled over. I was tired at that point. And I started falling asleep again. Well, literally about a half hour later, I'm awakened from Jason making all this like rustling and banging noise and banging items together in his tent. And I'm like, what the hell is going on in camp tonight? You know, like I got something bothering my tent. And now Jason's over there making a bunch of noise at like 4 a.m. And so we were all having coffee in the morning. I think all of us slept till about 9 o'clock because we were all tired. And I asked Jason, I said, what were you doing at 4 o'clock in the morning? He was making all that noise. And he's like, something was trying to open the zipper on my Limelight tent, and I could see a dark face on the Limelight tent. It has this little plastic window on the rainfly that's outside the actual body of the tent. And he said he could see a dark face in it, and it was trying to zip the door open. So he started banging things together inside of his tent, and whatever it was went away. The whole time this is going on, Fleur and Jeremy don't move a muscle, and the dog that's with them makes no noise and doesn't
in hiding.
Yeah, it was really weird, man. Like, why would the dog not be barking or growling or nothing? And you know, if you're familiar with German Shepherds, they're not a cowering dog. They're a pretty tough dog, and to this day I still don't know why Jeremy's German Shepherd didn't bark or whine or make any or fuss or anything. And what Jeremy told me is that he woke up to his German Shepherd wedged next to him, where usually it sleeps at his feet. And I wonder if it was scared and was wedging up against him. He says, my dog never sleeps next to me like that. So that was a little bizarre too. So that was 2012. As you know, I literally saw something bipedal with its, silhouette. I didn't see the actual whatever it was because it was just the moonlight casting its shadow through my rainfly. But whatever it was, I saw it physically reach down and try to lift up my rainfly on my tent. And that was terrifying to me. I'm not going to lie. Definitely the next night did not sleep well when we were in there because I was expecting this thing to come back, but it didn't. I think that was the year where I was finally like, I really don't care what anybody thinks after this many years of this. I've had 4 years of backpacking into this drainage, and these things keep happening. Like, something's going on. I think that's where the skepticism started to really melt away, was after that trip. So
I would describe that as kind of a classic experience where there's a lot of similar instances where someone catches a Sasquatch poking at the tent, or they can see something in the light like you're describing. It sounds like your friend probably had a pretty good view. Was that kind of plastic window?
He said
plastic,
all he could see is the moon was like lighting up the side of its face. But he says even with the moon lighting it up, it was pitch black, the face.
Okay, really dark.
But, if you look at the limelight and you try to look through that plastic window, it's not like clear glass, right?
Okay.
Like it's going to be like, if you know what one of those M-powered Lucy lamps you can get from REI, they're the inflatable solar lamps. Look through one of those plastics. You'll see detail, but you won't see finite detail like you can when you sharpen the lens on a photograph. It's still going to have distortion and details are hard to differentiate. Plus, it's the pitch of night. He's terrified. He straight up told me that was the most terrifying experience. And he had a full-on grizzly encounter that was stalking his tent in Glacier when he'd gone up there. And he still says to this day, this experience was more terrifying than the grizzly. And to me, I find that extremely interesting. Like, oh, that was scarier than a grizzly bear stalking your tent? So he obviously was scared. So I'll tell you, it had my heartbeat going for a minute. I'm just like, I hope I don't have to defend myself in this moment, because I really thought I was going to have to.
Well, we go on to 2013.
So this one, and I just spent the last weekend with him on Boulder Mountain. This was with my best friend in the whole wide world. We like to have a few beers when we go camping. And on this trip, we had literally hauled in like 18 beers between us because it was my birthday weekend. This was another August trip in there. So 2 years prior, we had gone in August. So to kind of give you a timeline, I have done one trip in here, like the June, July, which is the last one. I just, the 2012, and then I've done a couple in August. But most of the time I go in this basin is somewhere between Labor Day and the first part of October. So just to give you kind of an idea, the time of year that I'm going in there. We had gone in there. We were having a good time by the fire that night, just having a great conversation. We had a great meal. We had kind of pooled resources together to make like a really nice meal together and for our birthdays. And so we were sitting probably like 10:30 sitting around. I had my camera out running. I always do like star trails photography. That's my thing, or like getting the Milky Way or whatever. I had my camera out running a time lapse for a star trail, and my buddy sitting by the fire kind of maintaining it. And I come back in and, I sit down and crack open a beer and we're just kind of chit-chatting about things. And all of a sudden we hear these just loud bangs on a tree, like someone just bonk, bonk. Both of us were kind of just stopped mid-sentence. We're like, well, it was very loud. It was like very echoey through camp, too. So we knew it was pretty close. We were thinking it was right across the inlet, just about 20 yards from where we were sitting. And all of a sudden, right after those two loud bonk, bonks, 9 deer come walking into our camp. And I mean, so nonchalantly, like every time I've ever ran into a deer in North America, it goes bounding off like Bambi into the woods. They don't stick around. They don't want to get anywhere near me. These 9 deer were standing around our fire pit. If I would have been not scared of getting kicked, I could have probably pet one because it was so close to me. And they hung out by our fire pit. They're probably there for like a good 25 minutes. And both me and Jared are just like, well, I guess we got some unexpected company by our fire tonight. We're kind of chuckling about it. I mean, wouldn't you be laughing? You had 9 deer decide to just all of a sudden hang out with you by your campfire that night? And then this just god-awful scream. It was like the cross between something you might hear from like a banshee or a poltergeist mixed with a woman screaming, just comes roaring through the base, like really close to where we're at. And it both made me and Jared stand up. And these deer hightailed in the meadow just southwest of our camp. They were out of there. And it was just so absolutely bizarre, the behavior of these deers, that apparently they were a lot more scared of something else in the woods than us, because they decided to hang out by our campfire. And still to this day, we both are just like, what was that? We still can't figure it out. It was very bizarre, man.
I guess they knew, at least my interpretation is that they had some understanding that Sasquatch wasn't going to march right up to your campfire, and they might have a little shelter there, but that yell scared them all away.
That scream was just, I've heard a lot of different animals, and there's coyotes. Coyotes they don't just yap or do the stereotypical coyote howl everybody thinks about, because they'll yip and yap and talk to each other and stuff. I've heard all sorts. I've heard birds. Certain owls will do this screech, scream thing, and I've never heard anything like this. This was, I can only say there was one other place in the Uintas that I reported that to my friend I told you about, Todd, that we had this same kind of a scream, similar, not exactly the same, but very similar in an area that we were in over the Lakes Country Trail area of the Uintas. We had the campers that were by us, came over by their horses the next day. Something was spooking the horses in the meadow. It's the only other time I've ever heard anything like this. It was definitely just bizarre. And like, rose the hair on the back of your neck scary. That's how freaky this call was. And we just were like, oh, okay, whatever that was. And I think both of us just stoked the fire and looking over each other's backs, expecting something to come in there, and just it never did. But it was just weird. And maybe
Sounds
it was
like
just whatever it was angry that the deer had used us. Is like, I don't know. It was weird.
Sounds like they were upset their hunt had been interrupted and 20 minutes was long enough, and we're going to try to get the deer to move along again, or maybe.
Possibly, and maybe they were hoping we would split too, and but we had nothing else that weekend happen. We had a pretty quiet time in there the rest of the time. It was just that one incident with the deer. I've ran into deer all over the Uintas. I've been all over the high Uintas wilderness, and they don't come and hang out in my camp. Let me put it to you that way. Never seen that in my life.
Well, 2014.
All right, so this year I had gone in twice into the basin. One, but it was like a late August trip, and then once in October we had one of those falls where occasionally the Uintas, like last year it did this. I was able to go in the first weekend of October and get an overnighter in there, and the next weekend it snowed in there, so I literally got the last good weekend in there this past year in 2020. This was one of those years as well, and both times we went into the basin this year was really weird. It was like something was wailing, howling all weekend in the basin, and it just never stopped. It was like day and night, all day long, all night long, just never stopped howling. And then
Was that August or October?
Both.
Both.
On both trips, it did this. The whole, like, once you got over the pass, it was just, whoa, like this crazy wailing howl, and it was just bizarre. And my one friend that I went in the midsummer trip, the August trip, was saying that's a really weird coyote if that's a coyote. I remember him saying that. And then my other friend, Mike, that I went back in October, and he actually lives up in Montana now. He was like, dude, what is that? The whole time just kept remembering him saying, I wish that would stop. It's freaking me out, and both trips, both nights, and we've done 4 nights in this basin this year, wood knocks. The howls would just keep going. We'd have the boop, boop, and then it would just be quiet for like 45 minutes, and then so we'd be like, oh, what was that? And then back to functioning by the fire, doing our thing. Boop, boop, you'd hear it again. It was just really weird. I've never, I've heard howls and stuff, like the coyotes find the mountain goats in the middle of the night and they start going crazy, but this was 24 hours a day for 3 days straight in there. Just the howl never stopped. And I've never experienced anything like that. So I don't know what to think about that year. But one thing I will tell you about that trip is on our exploration on both Saturdays where we had looped the basin for fish, I kept seeing out of the corner of my eye, and every time I would stop and try to see it, it would completely drop out of view. But I kept seeing this dark figure. So I sometimes would see it on my left side, paralleling me in the trees, maybe 50 yards from me. And the second I would stop, because I would like catch a glimpse of like what maybe looked like an arm or maybe looked like a leg, would go behind a tree, and then I would stop, and whatever it was, you could hear it stop, but you couldn't ever see it. It was so weird, man, how this thing would give you just the slightest glimpse out of your peripheral vision, but then if you put your forward vision on it, it would just vanish. It was the weirdest thing ever. And I kept seeing this on both times that we did that loop on that Saturday, both the August trip and the October trip. I saw that dark figure sliding from tree to tree, paralleling us, following us through the basin. And that was very weird. Definitely got the feeling I was being followed. I didn't see, my friend Jason apparently has had more of a visual something his that tent trip in 2012 than I saw. But I just kept seeing this dark shape. Definitely had to be standing on 2 feet because it was too high off the ground. And you just would see it slip between trees. But you would never get a full view of it. It was just like a little piece of it.
Out of your
And
peripheral vision, could you kind of get a sense of how it was moving? Was it really swift, I would imagine?
really smooth. That's the thing that just freaked me out because, you see like an elk move, it kind of bounces, or a deer, they like, do the little boing boing thing, or even a bear will do this like kind of like weird turtle, like maybe a turtle could move fast thing. Like this thing was so smooth and it was so quick. And the second you give it your forward vision, it was so quick, you just dead stop. You'd hear it crunch and stop. Like that last footstep would crunch and it would just stop. It's like it knew when you were going to look at it and it would stop. It was just so weird, man. Never had any animal like that be that elusive. Ever. Not even cougar, bobcat, lynx. Saw lynx in Denali National Park and nothing like that. Even the wolves up there in Denali, which are one of the most elusive animals. And you see one, you basically won the Denali lottery, is what the rangers tell you when you see a wolf up there. And this thing was more elusive than any animal I've ever seen because it would just give you a slight glimpse of maybe what you thought was an arm. And then it's almost like it would melt into the tree that it was hiding behind. And then the second you'd start walking again, you'd see it like a leg come out or something, and then it would just go to the next tree, and then you couldn't see it anymore. It was just so weird how it always stayed out of line of sight.
Seems like it would have been really focused on you to perceive in the slightest instance, and when you stop, when you look that direction, is just really interesting how it can do that.
Yeah, just, talk about stealthy travel. That was definitely it. I just specifically remember it happened in August. So we had gotten up to that pond that I had recently mentioned from the 2009 story with the deer leg, and we were walking up the hill from that pond to the next pond, and that's where I was seeing it parallel me in the trees in the August trip. And then when we were coming up from number 5 in October, the lakes are all named in there. So when we were coming up from that lake, it's the same thing. It was just doing that thing between the trees. Everybody's like, you ever seen Sasquatch? And I'm like, maybe. And everybody's like, why didn't you take some pictures of that October trip? I was trying, but every time I would stop and give it forward vision to try to line up a shot, there's nothing there. Then I'd be like, okay, screw it, start walking again. All of a sudden you'd see a leg or an arm or whatever the hell it was go from tree to tree. And that's it. That's all you'd see. And I don't know how to scientifically, rationally explain that other than what I saw. So
I bet if you even had an action cam set up pointing that direction, it still would look like nothing because it's so, like you say, it's probably behind a tree 90% of it the whole way, and it's just nothing much to see. I mean, you can kind of catch things here and there and really quick. So anyway,
I think short of a FLIR, like probably would have been your only bet of maybe capturing this. And I had a DSLR with me. That's it. Very wide angle lens. So, trying to get anything up close because I shoot like big wide angle landscapes for my photography. So like, trying to get a zoom in on that, you'd have been cropping in and it would just been the atypical block squats that everybody else sees.
Yep.
But I was trying on that October trip. I'm like, I got to try to get a picture of this. And I just couldn't get it. It was so elusive.
Well, you're up to 2015, looks like.
So I went in solo this year after the stalking thing in October. I kind of was like, I don't know if I want to go back in there anymore. And I kind of had a little bit of, I've suffered from a little bit of anxiety most of my life. And I kind of had some anxiety when I came out from that last October trip. It really kind of messed me up backpacking like all together. Like, wow, I'm seeing things move between the trees. Either I'm crazy or there's something out there, right? And so I always tell people, this is just a piece of advice I always give people, that everything that you want in life resides on the other side of fear, right? And so I felt like, oh crap, if I'm going to continue doing this and doing this with my photography, I've got to break myself of the fear of this. So this was a year that I went and did a solo overnight trip. And, so I got in there, got camp set up, got firewood, got water, did a little fishing, and come back, made dinner. And right as it got dark, the only way that I can describe it is that if you've heard the Sierra sounds, I don't know if you're familiar with that recording, Rob Moorhead's recording of the Sierra sounds. Yep. So there's a part in it where he calls it samurai chatter, where it's really like discombobulated, almost like crazy speak. Like you're hearing some insane person trying to communicate to you. It's just like, and it was like grumpy, angry too. So I'm sitting there, and I just finished dinner and was having one of my beverages, and the fire's going, and I hear this coming from the outlet of the lake I'm at. And, of course, I stood on my feet, and I'm like, what the hell was that? And then it did it 4 more times. And then it just went silent. And I went to bed. It was like one of the earliest times. I didn't even shoot astrophotography that night because I didn't want to walk out to the lake by myself. I was so terrified. This thing was so loud and it sounded so angry. I slept maybe 2 hours, and that was like from 4 to 6. I got up at 6, put it all in the bag, and got the hell out of there. And I didn't feel safe. I honestly felt like something was following me until I got to the preface of the pass where you're looking over into the east side of the Uintas drainage. Then all the stress just seemed to melt away. I don't know if it was just something was chasing me out of there or didn't like I was there or, whatever. It was a sleepless night that was very disturbing. What's crazy is nothing else happened. After that crazy noise, nothing else happened. But I just laid in my tent. I would start to doze off, then I'd wake up and just completely be terrified and couldn't move. It was one of those times and I'm rarely scared of anything. It was one of those times I was terrified all night long, waiting for this thing to be standing outside my tent and then make that noise again. And I was going to jump out of my skin if it did, and nothing happened. It was weird. It was very bizarre.
Would you say the samurai chatter was higher pitched, or did it ever go low pitch, or just
no low pitch? It was like an angry old man. That's the only way I can.
Okay.
So I can put it. Like, just imagine an angry old man that's trying to get thoughts out of his mouth, but he just can't formulate the words. So that's what I felt like. I was getting yelled at by an angry old man, but an angry old man in the dark that I couldn't see. So it was weird.
Well, let's see, 2016.
Yep, and this was another August trip where I went in there for my birthday. I went in on Friday night by myself, and then my buddy that was on the 2009 trip came in the next morning and met me because he can only do an overnighter, so he had to work late. He came in Saturday morning. I literally had just gotten finished with my cup of coffee when him and his dog came walking into camp. We had more wood knocks and howls and children's voices on this trip, and I had it on Friday night, and then he was in there. It was weird. It sounded like kids were talking at that outlet area, and it was coming from the same area the year prior where it had that chatter, that's rah, 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 rah. But this time it sounded like kids talking. If you've ever been camping in the woods or been near a set of young scouts or whatever, you'll hear what it sounds like when they're talking in their camp.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like kids were there, and we walked over to the outlet on Saturday night, and there was no one over there. But we were still hearing the voices. It was just bizarre. It was the last time I'd ever had this friend come with me into that basin. Kind of spooked him a little bit. He was just kind of like, okay, that was a little weird for me. On our way out, he's like, I don't know if I'm coming back in here. And he's never come back in with me since.
Yeah, I start hearing things, seeing things. I can, understand that.
Yeah, on that trip, too, as well. So we were at camp. This was after we had gone and inspected the outlet for we were hearing what sounded like children talking. And we come back to camp, and we're just sitting around the fire, and literally probably about 100 yards into the meadow, we hear this big old tree go over and just crash. And there was no wind. This is one of those windless nights. If you've ever been out in the Uintas and there's a windless night, you can literally hear a pin drop when there's no wind blowing because it's just so quiet. And this tree just sounded like a volcano had erupted when it fell over. And we walked over in the morning on the way out to see the tree that fell over, and how am I supposed to know if it fell on its own or if something pushed it over? But it was just pretty coincidental. 15 minutes after we get back to camp, all of a sudden this loud bang, just tree goes down and there's no wind. It hadn't been raining. The ground was pretty dry that year. We really hadn't had a big snowfall year, so I don't attribute it to, oversaturated earth and the tree just couldn't hold itself anymore because, the trees in the Uintas can't root themselves very much deeper than 4 or 5 feet because it's rock below that. I don't know if something pushed that over, but that was just the other incident on that one. We just had this massive tree come over.
A lot of weird stuff. So that one was August 2016. I forgot to ask,
Correct.
2015, was that a summer one or was that more fall? Or?
No, that was definitely the Labor Day area time frame.
Okay,
so.
September. Okay. Well,
okay, and so going to 2017, did another solo trip in there. This one, I've been fishing the inlet area, and I had my DSLR kind of strapped around with the strap like a sling. So it was like under my armpit, and I was like fishing with my fly rod. And I decided, oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to go back to camp. So I wasn't catching anything. And I went to step on this rock that I've stepped on literally like 100 times. And I had sent you a podcast about this because I had talked about this same story in that one.
Yeah, I finally listened to the whole thing. It was pretty
Yeah,
good.
so this rock that I had stepped on 1,000,000 times literally sunk into the lake like quicksand. And so to save my DSLR, I tried to do what I always do when I'm snowboarding, fall to your back, because it's the strongest thing you can fall to. And well, I kind of went to my back, but to my left side, and there was like one of those little shark's teeth granites sticking up out of the grass that my upper left quad went into. And I thought I broke my leg at first, man. I seriously was like, oh no, I'm in here by myself, and I'm not expected out for 2 days, and this time I wasn't carrying a PLB, a personal locator beacon. I thought I was going to have to lay there for a couple of days with a broken femur, and wait for rescue. And so I kind of staggered back into camp. It was very painful. It was a very cold time of year. I had taken some rocks from in camp that were cold, was pressing it on the area. Really dark purple bruise was coming in there. So I didn't know if I had like internal bleeding going on. I took some Advil. I kind of elevated it and was just keeping cold rocks on it the whole time. Nightfall came in. I got my fire going. I was still kind of in some pain. I think the ibuprofen was starting to diminish the pain, but I was still kind of freaked out. Like, am I going to be able to walk out of here tomorrow? And so it got dark, right? And you can see the other side of the lake from the camp that you're at. And I kept seeing these red eyes, like bright red eyes. It was pacing across the other side of the lake. And then it would like act like it was headed my way. So I was like freaked out and getting my knife out. And then it would like start to pace back and forth again where I could see these two red eyes. And this went on for probably like, I don't know, man. I'd say 2 or 3 hours I was watching this thing pace back and forth. Never a sound. Didn't make a noise. I swear to God, at one point I had heard like a tree rustle over there. But no like calls or yelling or anything like that. It was just these red eyes. And then about midnight, they just vanished. And that's when I crawled into my tent and was praying that I felt better in the morning, which gratefully I did. I got up. I felt at least 100% better than I had done the night before, and was able to pack up camp and haul my butt out of there. But I had that bruise on my leg. You can ask my wife. I had that purple hematoma for at least a year from that fall. And it was freaky because I was injured, and I didn't know what these two red eyes were that were across the lake looking at me. And it was staring right at me and my campfire. I know it would just stop and stare, and then it would move, and you'd see him move, and then you'd see it stop and just stare. It was just very weird, man. Like, very, very weird.
And just a side note there, I don't know how much stock to take in it, but I've heard from other stories I've read that if they have yellow eyes, that you're okay, but if they turn red, somehow, at least the saying is that indicates that they're under stress, or maybe their face is flushed, or they're angry or surprised, or I don't know, how that works, if that's some logical thing, or I'm totally off base, but just pass along what I've heard, that when they turn red, it's kind of some indication there of and I don't know if that had any bearing
That's
on
interesting. I wonder if it was angry I was there or whatever, and that's very interesting. I've never heard that theory, but that's interesting. The eye shine that we saw in 2010 was bright yellow, and like bigger eyes than these were. These were like, the only way I can describe it is if you could have two red glowing human eyes. It was weird, man. It was just, and that side of the lake over there is pitch black against the cliff band. So there's not a lot of room where it could have been someone with like a red headlamp, because there's nowhere to camp over there. It literally goes up like 600 feet straight in the air, slope with rugged boulders and stuff. So there's not like, even just trying to circumnavigate the lake through that area is tough. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no place to camp over in that side of the lake. And so that you're like right up against a rock face on that shoreline. And so that's what really was freaking me out. It was like, what is over there? Because there's nowhere for it to go.
Yeah, very low likelihood of anything to do with a human. Oh.
Yeah, it was freaky. That's all I got to tell you.
Oh, we're up to 2018.
Yeah, so this is the third and final scary story of the, I've had some other stuff go on in the next couple of years after this, and we'll definitely get into that because that's interesting. But this was the finals. This was the third hair-raising, scary, like definitely left me freaked out story. So I talked to you about the pond that we had found in 2009 with the deer leg. So up from that's another pond. And I had traversed through the woods because I just like doing that hike. It's challenging. It's off trail. You got to navigate, use your GPS to find your way through the woods to get up through these two ponds from camp. It's just, and I like that kind of thing. It tests your mettle as far as a backpacker. Can you off trail hike? Can you follow a route, And so I finally got up to this pond, and it was about noon. So I was like, okay, I packed it sandwich and some crackers and some chips and stuff. And so, I set my day pack down on my right leg. There's this kind of really nice flat rock. If you were to like dead center the lake on the east side of the lake, it's like this perfect bench. So I pulled up a seat there and was eating my sandwich. I had just finished my sandwich. I just pulled out my potato chips. And all of a sudden this rock hits my backpack. And I'm like, huh? And I halfway expected to stand up and turn around and see one of my friends standing there going, ha, like joke's on you. And there was no one there. And then another rock skips off the top of the rock that I was sitting on. And I'm like, okay. And then another rock strikes that rock I was sitting on again. And then another one hits my backpack. So at this point, I'm grabbing the pack, throwing it over my shoulders, grabbing my flare. I've still got a bag of chips in my hand. And I'm running. I hear 3 more rocks strike the ground behind me before I seem to get out of distance for wherever it was throwing. And upon finishing my loop of the basin, I realized I was the only person camped in there for this holiday weekend. No one had come in here for a camp. And I didn't see anybody when I went out on that Monday morning either, that there was still nobody in there. And I still to this day cannot explain what was throwing rocks at me. Certainly bears and cougars don't throw rocks at humans. So I'm just telling you this. I didn't even stop at the next lake and fish. I just kept hiking. I had so much adrenaline going. I literally pushed on to the lake that was above where I was camped and then kind of got my wits about me and was a little more calm at that point and fished for a little bit. But I didn't even fish the lake that I was passing after this one because I was just like trucking because I had so much adrenaline going. I thought whatever was throwing rocks at me was still behind me.
That's, I would say, what's called classic Sasquatch behavior, at least what they attribute to them. So, anyway.
Yeah, I never had anything throw rocks at me before in the wilderness, so I definitely have to say this was just a bizarre one. And, at this point, I'm just like, what is going on in here? We're literally heading towards 10 years of time in this basin, and this stuff just keeps happening. It was just bizarre, man. Just absolutely bizarre.
I guess just really quickly, taking yourself back to 2018, what is your thoughts that run through your head? I mean, are you full on saying this is Sasquatch, or is that in 2020?
I don't know. Because I didn't see anything. Trust me, like when that rock hit my backpack, it made me stand up. There was just something in my brain. It was like, stand up and turn around. Like, you ever had like something happen and it's like a voice inside your head tells you to do something? Mm-hmm. And so it was like when that rock hit my backpack, I was like still chewing on the last bite of my sandwich, and there was something in my head that said stand up and turn around. In my head, I'm just thinking, oh, it's got to be one of my friends. Where it just happens every once in a while. I run into my friends out in the deep next to the woods, and I had to Granddaddy Basin once, and I all of a sudden hear my name being called, and I look up on a cliff, and it's 2 of my friends, and I had no idea they were even in there. So I half expected when the rock hit my backpack that it was one of my friends playing a joke on me. When I turned around, there's nothing there. And then another rock comes sailing in and hits the rock that I was just sitting on. Or whoever or whatever is throwing these rocks at me was intentionally missing me, but throwing them close enough to me to get my attention. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And I
trying to knock you out cold, but they want you to move on or something.
I wasn't even thinking at the moment these rocks were being thrown. I was trying to figure out what was throwing them at me. And then when they just kept coming, it was like, okay, well, apparently I need to go. That's all I could think about. And I didn't think Bigfoot or anything related to that until I got back to camp that night and was sitting around my campfire. Then I was just like, I wonder if this is more of that weirdness that I have every year I come in here. So, I take it for what it is. I honestly, and I tell people this all the time, I don't care whether people believe me or not, because I was there and witnessed and had all this stuff happen. And there was people there that witnessed it with me. And, so if I'm crazy, then those people must be crazy too. And trust me, those people are not crazy. So then what is it, right? And that's why I'm just like, I can only share my stories. People can take them for what they are, but these things really happen. I have nothing to gain by sharing any of this. If I was trying to do that, I would divulge more about myself and try to be promoting things. I'm not. That's not it at all. I'm just trying to share this because maybe somebody else has had this experience somewhere else or with something else. And the more of us that have commonalities with these experiences, the more people are willing to talk about this stuff. We can get further into this than where we're at right now. But I think right now we're just kind of stuck between ego and a hard place. I'm hoping that me sharing this stuff will, maybe it's just interesting. It's filled somebody's time. Great. I'm glad my stories did that for you. If you relate to some experience you had, great. That's great too. I kind of look at this as sharing all this as sort of therapy because some of this has been traumatic. Some of it has been, I suffer from PTSD and anxiety. I have most of my life. And there is some of this that has definitely aggravated my PTSD at times, especially this rock throwing incident. And was definitely one of the scariest things I've ever had to happen in the wilderness. What is throwing rocks at me? And, you turn around, you expect to see something throwing rocks at you. There's nothing there. But the rocks keep coming. How do you explain that?
Yeah, there's no easy good explanation.
Without people that don't believe in this stuff or whatever, thinking you're crazy when you do explain it. It's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and just a quick side note, I know what you mean about having someone else there. Just really quickly, not to discuss about myself much, but one time I was with several other people, and there's this, basically we're in the wilderness, and there's a kind of a scree, rock slide, a long area where, just boulders go all the way up the mountain. And there were two ladies with us, and one of them kind of has a loud laugh, and she was laughing with the other lady there, and all of a sudden, up in this slide, the very top, we hear something mimicking the laughter.
Oh.
And we all heard it. We checked with one another. Did you hear that? Yes, we all confirmed that they were mimicking the laughter. Was the best thing we could come across. So it's nice to have someone else there, and you're not crazy. You didn't just lose your mind and do anything.
And that's what sucks about the solo trips is when stuff happens is that you think you're losing your mind because there's not someone else to hear it, where you have like 4 or 5 people with you and they see the same thing happen. It's real easy to go, oh yeah, that happened. You start second guessing yourself because you're like, okay, am I crazy? Maybe I don't want to share this with somebody because they're going to think I'm nuts, right? And that story you just shared reminds me of a time we were down in southern Utah where I had just gone last week, and we had discussed this earlier. And we all 5 of us had gotten to camp, got everything set up. We're just getting the fire pit ready and cleaned out, and all of a sudden we heard 2 loud wood knocks. And so I yelled at my friend jokingly, hey, pick up that log and whack it on that aspen. He whacks twice, and it answers back like immediately. And we went back and forth with whatever was knocking on this tree for literally 35 minutes, and all 5 people heard the same thing, exact same thing.
I know the area you're talking about down there. It's another big area and a lot of woods, and it's not many. The population of Utah is more centered in the north, so I doubt there's as many people that
there was
traffic
no one
through
on
there.
We were the first ones in there to camp at this spot that year because the leads were still in the fire pit. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there had been no fire in there. No one had camped. You can tell on trails, too, when new snow comes off and they haven't been hiked yet because they still have that kind of rippled effect from where the water melted off in them. There's no footsteps in the trail. So we knew we were the first people into this area, so there was no one else in there. And that was just one of those where you were just explaining how they had the mimicking laughing. Oh, this thing was mimicking our tree knocks. Every single time. It was like my friend had busted a log in camp on a rock, and that's when it went bonk, bonk. And so I was like, oh, hey, hit that tree over there, Gabe. He picked up the thing, hit it twice, and it responded immediately, probably 200 yards to the west of us. And there's not like an echo in there because this place doesn't have that kind of terrain where you would echo or anything. Like, how some mountain search you can go in and you'd be like, hello, and it'll like repeat it 10 times or whatever. Like this, there's no way this is going to echo because it's very flat. It's bizarre when that stuff happens and you as a group are looking at each other like, what the hell was that, right? It's downright creepy.
Well, 2019, 2020.
Yeah, 2019, I had gone in there solo. It was really quiet in there this year, unusually quiet. Like, usually you have, like, the woodpeckers, and you get some other birds and some songbirds and magpies and things like that in there. There's no birds at all this year. It was so just dead of wildlife in there. I just never have had that experience in here. And, you know, it was pretty mellow day, pretty just average backpacking trip day, nothing out of the ordinary. I was like, oh, maybe I'm actually going to have just a normal backpacking trip in this place this year. Nope, not after I went to bed. That wasn't the case. Again, something was picking my titanium cook gear up and down on the rock and clanking it down. And then I could hear, if you know what a bear rope sounds like, a nylon rope, it's kind of like a paracord. So I had it, just out of camp over like a 15-foot high tree limb to hang for bears and squirrels, mostly squirrels, because bears don't generally travel to these elevations in the Uintas. They don't go above like 9,500 feet. It's a rarity you'll see a bear at that elevation. It's mostly just keep the ground squirrels and chipmunks out of your food, right? And I could hear something pulling on the rope, and you could hear the zzz of the rope sliding over the tree branch. Every time I'd shine my headlamp out of the front of my tent to see what was making either the clanking of my cook gear on the rock or the bear rope move, it would stop. And finally, I zipped the mesh door, because I usually leave my vestibule door open so I have good ventilation at night. So I zipped the mesh door open on the body of my tent and poked my head out with my headlamp to get a better, and all of a sudden I just hear 2 feet crashing through the bush headed towards the lake above my camp. And it was just really weird. The other times I turned on the headlamp, the activity would just stop. But when I actually poked my head out of the tent, whatever it was just took off running. And that kind of freaked me out. It took me about 45 minutes to fall back asleep after that. I laid there and sit and listen, and there was no more clanking of the cook gear, no more messing with my bear rope after that. When it went crashing off through the woods, that was it. That was the end of it. And that was all that happened that weekend. I didn't have any more experiences with anything. That was just that night. Something was in there checking my stuff out.
Sounds like you're not alone again, even though you're not a solo trip.
Yeah, no, here we go again. Just another visitor, right? Like, what the hell's going on here? And at this point, I'm fully convinced of what's going on there. And I have broken myself here at this point, too. I wasn't scared of anything anymore, which I think was making me pay more attention to its behavior than just, like, laying there terrified. Like, what is that, you know? I was, like, laying there listening for it. Okay, it's going to pick those up, because you'd hear it pick up my coffee cup and go clink. And then it would just go dead silent for a minute. I'm like, okay, now it's going to pick up my cook gear. Get ready. And sure enough, it would. And you'd hear it kind of like tossle and pick it up. And then you'd hear the clank of it setting it down. Yeah, it was strange, man. That's all I got to say. It's just weird.
Well, I guess we're up to 2020. This is where you get your friend Todd
So
involved.
this is the 11th year. This year, you know, everybody, you know, you can vouch for everybody's 2020, right? You know, it's everybody had kind of a crazy, strange year for 2020, the worldwide pandemic. I have a mutual friend that was a follow-up investigator for the BFRO previously and now runs his own group in Utah here. They investigate sightings and go and investigate areas that they think would have the best activity. Yeah, I would love to see you guys, because I know this is your thing as well. I'd love to see you guys kind of get together and do some stuff together, because I think both of your group, their group, would have a really cool experience out there, because just the knowledge base that you're going to have between, you know, yourself and their group is going to be unbelievable. And maybe you guys can combine all your tech, maybe rustle something up, man. But anyways, this individual, I was the very first person I ever contacted about any of these experiences back in 2010 after the eyes incident. This individual, for years, we've been trying to connect to get him to come in with this. Well, he had a weekend free. I had a weekend free, so we finally made it happen. So lo and behold, this time I've got a legitimate person as a level 2 tracker and is a Bigfoot investigator, right? So I'm like stoked. I'm like, okay, well, if anything happens this weekend, right, we're going to be in good hands, because I'm not going to sit there like, you know, a deer in the headlights and wonder what the hell to do with myself when these weird things happen. So Todd had gone in a little early before me. I'm like maybe 2 hours. I just had a little later departure from my house. And so he had, on his Garmin InReach, let me know he had got to camp, but I was just pulling out a canvas to head up the highway to get to the trailhead, and finally got into camp, and Todd was down fishing at the shore, and we kind of, you know, said our hellos, and good to see each other again. And then he had kind of walked me through camp. He had taken this, it was like kind of a sewing thread, like purple sewing thread, and had gone up about 7-8 feet in the trees and made a perimeter around our camp with this thing. So anything tall that would walk through there would trip that line, so he would be able to tell how tall it was. It was tall enough that a deer could go underneath it and it wouldn't, clip it. Even a buck with its antlers wouldn't hit it. He had like an audio recorder too. We did catch a whoop that we got. So that night, after we got settled in, the darkness had fallen, I set the camera out for another star trail. Todd started doing kind of a little bit of an investigation where he was doing, some wood knocks. He did some interesting calls. They weren't howls, they were more calls. We did get some sort of whoop, like that literal sound, like whoop, come after one of his calls from the ridge that was above where those eyes I had seen a couple years previous. And then we swore to God we had heard children's voices again at the outlet, but it was really hard to tell because the water was running really loud at the outlet that year. And we didn't really walk out of camp to investigate it because Todd was still kind of perplexed on the whoop that had come over the ridge. And at that point, I was tired. I was like, all right, I want to turn in. We went to bed and got up in the morning, had our coffee. Todd went out fishing while I was getting ready. And then I put together my day pack and fly rod, and he wanted me to tour him the whole basin so he could see the terrain, get familiar with the area. So if they wanted to go back and investigate things, they could. And took him up to the pond with the deer leg, and he found that area quite interesting, actually. Some of the stuff that he was doing, I don't understand what he was doing, but he was investigating some of the tree trunks. Maybe he was looking for hair or something. I don't know. I just kind of was looking at the pond to see if the salamanders were in there, but I would look over every once in a while, and he'd be like looking at a tree branch or examining the ground below a tree or something, and just really interesting what he was doing. And this is where we went up to the next pond, and this is where we found a 60-yard long trackway, which the average size of these tracks were, 11 inches, some were a little bit longer, but the shape of them and the size and the depth in the substrate of these tracks caught my eye at first. I'm the one that noticed them. Todd almost walked past them, and I pointed him out, hey, that looks kind of interesting. What do you think? And he's a, level 2 tracker, so this is what he's trained for. And the second he saw the one I pointed out to him, he was like on all fours, down on the ground, looking at detail of this thing. And he starts like mapping these tracks in his GPS. Like he's mapping the track line and getting a calculation of it. That's where we got the 60 yards. The gate was straddled. The distance between tracks was sometimes 30 inches, sometimes 40. And there was sort of a meander about these tracks too. And you have to understand, in this boggy, muddy area, there was a lot of other animal tracks, like deer tracks, moose tracks. I think we saw an elk track in there. We saw a cougar track in the mud. So this was definitely an area, and a muddy area, where a lot of animals were frequenting. But this trackway of these straddled tracks with toes, no claw marks, and these weren't double step of bear, definitely a elongated track that was leaving like a mid-tarsal print, which, according to Todd and all these people that investigate this stuff, that's how the Sasquatch foot works, is it has a mid-tarsal break in the middle of the foot. Some other primates have that as well. And so we were seeing evidence of this. And so I started photographing the tracks, and Todd's getting measurements and geolocating each one of them. And he didn't have a casting set because he didn't think he was going to see tracks this weekend. So we photographed and documented them pretty damn well. And then we decided to go walk out of there. And on our way out of there, I'm looking up on this cliff that's above where we were, looking at the tracks. And I can see this little pine in there shaking. And I can see some sort of white shape in there, but I just can't tell what it is. And I'm thinking in my mind, maybe that's a mountain goat, because mountain goats are pretty white, right? But it's just, I've never seen a mountain goat shake a little pine like this. It was just really weird. And I got it on video. You've seen the video of that horse. Both me and Todd were still just like, what is shaking that tree up there? We didn't get it. Well, after I had returned home from this trip, I had an individual named Andrew contact me who had seen my video, and then he went in there the next week, the same weekend Todd and those guys had gone back to cast all the tracks. He had taken a still from my video so he could kind of try to line up his photograph that he was going to take in there. And when he got home and examined his side by side with mine, he noticed a dark figure in the still from my video that I didn't even notice. I was so fixated on the moving tree, I didn't even notice the little dark figure that wasn't in his photo a week later when he went back there to take the picture. So there's something in that photograph, and I sent you that photograph. Mm-hmm. There's something there in that still that I didn't notice, but it's not something that's always there. Does that make sense? It's not like a bush or a tree. It's something that wasn't there when someone went back a week later. So I don't know what I caught. Anders was convinced that he'd also found some gifting areas too, where they had made these like circular structures and then put like flowers in them. And he had found a rock that was way far away from any pine trees, and it just had a stack of pine cones on it. Stuff. I guess he's kind of a amateur sort of squatcher, was really interested in the subject, and so he noticed these things that I didn't even notice any. So we were so fixated on the tracks and the tree shaking, we didn't notice any of this. So yeah, so to have someone view your YouTube video and then come back the next week and tell you, oh hey, I was in Moab with my family when he sent me the message, like, hey, I'd like you to check out this still from your video, and then I'd like you to see a photo I took and put them side by side. Tell me what you think. And I could see it clear as day. And you saw those two photos, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you can clearly see the dark figure in my photo, in the still for my video. So did I get something on video? I don't know. If it would be anything, it would probably land in the blob squatch because it's so pixelated and far away. But it's still crazy to think there's something up on that cliff band. And that cliff band is not easily accessible. I've walked up that slope before. It's not easy to get up there. So we came out. Todd went back in 7 days later. I sent you the link to his group's video of casting the tracks and how they found a trackway that came in from the woods, and they're completely convinced it wasn't human. And I sent these photos to Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. He did a full Facebook post on them. And then I had another anthropologist at the University of Utah examine them, and he was completely convinced they were not human because they just don't make the shape of human tracks. And the depth of those tracks, whatever it was, had to be in the 400 to 600 pound range.
And I saw that video. I talked to whomever was there wasn't convinced, or at least the guy in the video, until they saw the tracks are actually coming up from the mountains, because why would you, just kept making a point about why would you have children or kids or anybody on this ground with all the rockiness, all the wood.
Canadian thistle,
yeah, that's right.
You're
Canadian
asking
thistle.
for a foot injury. I wouldn't let my kids run around up there barefoot. I'll tell you that much right now. No way. And yeah, that video, seeing them find that. So I didn't see that where it came from the woods. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's kind of some traveling pathways between those ponds where you would expect someone to go, right? This trackway where they're pointing it was coming from, I wouldn't even have hiked up there with my hiking boots on. And there's bare footprints coming from this really remote, rocky, untamed area that you're totally going to get a foot injury if you're walking through there with bare human feet. So yeah, no, I completely agree with him. Kind of when you're watching that video, at first he's kind of like, yeah, I don't know, I'm on the fence, right? And then he sees that, and all of a sudden his mind's changed. Okay, now I know. That was just like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty for sure. I've had 4 people examine this stuff now. You guys took casts of these tracks. They're not human. They're just not. Human tracks don't look like that. The one that I sent you with my fly rod next to it, the human footprints don't look like that. They just don't. Even a double step of a bear doesn't look like that. It's very bizarre. Looks like something that would, if you looked at that kind of foot that would have to make that print, it's definitely something that would bear heavy weight. Just because of the actual length of the foot, the width of the foot. So if it was something very heavy, it would have to be a foot that would bear that kind of weight to put that kind of depression in the ground. And here's the thing is that what you can totally tell by the tracks is that they were made when this area was wet and then the area dried out, right? These weren't just made and then we went and photographed them. They had been there for probably a week or two because they'd had some pretty bad thunderstorms and like an early August snowfall up there. That's when Todd thinks they were made, was when that storm came through. And then after that, we had a high pressure system that came in and dried them out. So that's why you kind of see some cracks in the mud in them and stuff. And, some of them still had, because they were so deep into the substrate, some of them still had that wet impression in some of the toe areas and stuff that you would see on them. So, yeah, here's the other thing is, too. So that weekend that they had the winter weather up there, the week prior to them, when we went in there backpacking, it was like 12 degrees up there. Who the hell is running around barefoot in 12-degree weather? Surely not me. So, it's like I say in my video on there, I'm just a photographer and a backpacker, and these are just the things that I photographed, right? But when you rule out all the rational explanations, what are you left with? and you stack this 11 years of experiences together, what are you left with? Am I just crazy? You could think that. Am I telling the truth? You could think that. Am I misinterpreting something or misidentifying something? You could think that. I'm not a scientist. All I know is that I definitely can guarantee you I look at all this from a scientific perspective and not from a phantasmal perspective, or I know exactly what's going on here. I don't. It's just piqued my curiosity, and it's definitely put me beyond the point of where, okay, I can't be one of those people that sits there and goes, oh, that's just hogwash. I can't, because I've had too much experience in here now. You just don't go back from something. And I think the track find this past summer was the final, because it was the first time I'd brought out physical evidence of something in there that wasn't human and wasn't known. Those tracks are not tracked. I see moose tracks all the time in the wilderness. I see bear tracks. I see cougar tracks. Every track of an animal that walks on dirt in the Uintas, I have seen. I've never seen tracks like this in the Uintas. So, and that's why I'm saying, to come out with some sort of physical evidence like this, I'm definitely more convinced than I ever have been that something's going on in here. And I hope everybody gets to the bottom of this mystery, because I really feel like I said, if this is a primate, then we're missing a huge part of evolution by not understanding and having taxonomy on this. And the unfortunate part about it is it will probably take a body for science to be convinced that this creature is real. I think that will be a sad day if we had to kill one to prove it to science. So I hope maybe a better DNA sample, or someone's willing to move past the stigma and actually chart this DNA for its own species instead of just doing comparative analysis to it. That would be phenomenal. I would love to see that happen.
Well, and that brings us to present. You've assembled all this experience. You have evidence of tracks and casts, and scientists are even confirming that what you have is not human. So, there's a pretty good case for Sasquatch. There's always going to be doubters out there, and there'd be hoaxers too, but I don't think that this is any of that. Anyway, anything else you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
I appreciate the folks like yourself, Rex, that are trying to approach this from a scientific perspective, and I've definitely had a chance to view some of your videos and stuff, and I definitely appreciate how you are going about trying to keep this in a scientific realm and leave the possibilities open so that you can examine the evidence and stuff like that. I appreciate that. I think some of the Bigfoot world is not like that. I think some of the Bigfoot world is really a detriment to this mystery. Because it's just about them. It's not about trying to get to the truth. And, be wary of that in this world. There's a lot of people out there that are going to try to tell you that, this is 100% Sasquatch evidence, but be wary of that, because there's a lot of people, and as you've explained as well in our conversations, there's some kooky people involved with this mystery, and you have to kind of filter that for yourself to get through it. And like I said, for me, I'm not a Bigfooter. That's not what I do. I'm a backpacker and a photographer, and I love being in the wilderness. It's where I feel most at home. I just happen to have experiences in a place that has a vivid history of sightings as well as a missing persons case. And like I said, when you wrap it all together in your head, you start to move away from coincidence and start to move toward ruling things out. And that's where I'm really at the stage right now. I've ruled almost everything out at this point. And when you have track evidence like we got last year, now you start to open your mind up of the possibilities. And, I definitely will be returning to this area again. I'll probably be going in here until I'm too old to backpack in here anymore, I'm going to be like that 65-year-old guy in there going, I'm going to get in there one more time, I'm sure I'll probably visit this area every year until I can't do it anymore, just because I want answers in my head. It's like I told you, it's like any other wilderness animal. I want to understand it. I want to understand the dangers to me in it and how to conduct myself around it. So there's a level of harmony between my visits in the wilderness and this animal, because, it has a right to be there and do what it's doing. And I definitely want to be always respectful of the wilderness and its home, because for me, I'm just a visitor there. So.
Well said. And could just maybe briefly also say, there is some, as you're well aware, infighting between sectors of the Bigfoot communities and egos and things like that. And some people just like to study that part of it. I kind of try to stay away from that because it's a kind of a mess, but hope that gets better. Well, I don't have much else to add, so I guess thanks for coming on, and maybe see you in the wilderness sometime. So talk with you later.
Yeah, man. And like I said, I'll be going back in there this year, so maybe you could roll some video footage, and we can go in there and try to figure out what's going on this fall. I think around the Labor Day time period, I'll be headed back in here, and you're welcome to tag along with me if you want and film whatever you want, and you can do a little more of a visual thing instead of just hearing me talk and stuff like that. You can kind of go out and do your thing out there, and trust me, I'll stay out of your way. I'll just get you in there and show you where everything happened, and you can poke around yourself and see what's going on, and you can kind of give your viewers a little deeper insight. So if you're interested in that later on in the year, let me know, and you're always welcome to come back at any time, man. You're a really nice guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my stories. So,
well, yeah, I'd be open to that. I'd have some more visuals to kind of go along with the story, see where everything happened, and yeah, that'd be really cool experience, and who knows what will happen, but yeah, so anyway.
All right, man. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's been fun to talk about all this, so.
Okay, I'll talk with you later.
All right, thanks a lot, Rex. Appreciate it, man. You have a good night.